Hey, how's it going? So, back in the 50s, out near the California desert, there was this secret little town called Victory, where all the families lived happily, mainly because they had these picture-perfect lives. Every single morning, the millionaire husbands would head off to work at the Victory Project headquarters, located just outside the city, and the wives would stay behind looking after the house, practicing their ballet with the teacher, and enjoying a really luxurious social life, This was all because their husbands were extremely well paid. However, the wives were absolutely not allowed to ask any questions about their husband's work, and any visits to the headquarters were strictly forbidden. But one of these very wives was about to completely change this project, and that's exactly where we meet Alice and Jack, the couple who have a very active sex life and just love throwing parties for all their neighbors, especially for Alice's best friend, Bunny, along with her own husband, Dan. Sometimes, the entire town shakes for a few seconds, and Alice always makes sure to ask Jack if it has anything to do with the Victory Project, but he never ever gives her an answer. Since they are a really happy couple, she doesn't really let it bother her. One afternoon, right after their ballet class, Bunny and Alice are watching a new neighbor move in while they're gossiping about the fact that their friend Margaret didn't show up for class today. This wasn't a huge surprise really, because Margaret had become the most hated woman in the whole city after some kind of mysterious incident. A little later on, Alice is out in her garden when she spots Margaret in her own backyard, holding a toy airplane in her hands with her eyes shut, seemingly having a strange vision. She just won't open her eyes, and Alice simply stands there and observes her. While she's getting dinner ready, Alice discovers that all of the eggs in the carton are strangely completely empty, and she gets so worried about this weird discovery that the dinner actually starts to burn in the oven. But then, a few days later, Alice is at a party at Frank and Shelley's place. They're the most powerful couple in the entire Victory Project, and she notices a little melody playing in her head, and these odd images start flashing before her eyes. However, once again, she just forgets all about it when her friend Bunny distracts her again. Shelley and her husband Frank are so powerful because he is the actual CEO of the Victory Project, and he's giving a big welcome speech to the newest citizens. The speech is suddenly interrupted by Margaret, who asks why they are all there and says they were never supposed to be in this place. Her husband quickly takes her away, but now the whole vibe feels pretty uncomfortable, you know. So Frank takes charge of the conversation to remind everyone that they are all there to change the world by building a small town that's based on total security, order, and where money was never an issue. Afterwards, Alice, who is still quite worried about Margaret, goes looking for her and finds her at her house being medicated by her husband. Margaret desperately tries to tell Alice that she's not okay, that she's had nightmares, and that they're basically hiding her in that place, but her husband slams the door shut to keep her away. Alice goes back to the party and finds Jack in Frank's bedroom fixing his tie. Jack starts getting a little frisky with his wife right then and there, and things begin to heat up when Frank walks in and just watches the couple in a very weird way. But then he leaves without saying a single word. The very next day, Alice and her rich friends are out shopping at the mall when the topic of Margaret comes up again. They're all talking about her strange behavior ever since the accident, but Bunny figures it probably wasn't an accident at all. Margaret broke the one and only rule she had and took her son out into the desert because she saw something, most likely a hallucination. When they finally found her, she was all alone holding her son's toy airplane, and they never ever found the child again. However, in Margaret's mind, they took her son away from her as a form of punishment. The conversation gets cut short because the ground starts to shake again, but the women don't even react because they're so used to it by now. One of them asks if maybe the men are developing weapons or something like that, but Bunny just says their only mission is to fully support their husbands and not ask any questions. That night, Alice starts having these extremely bizarre dreams, and she just can't stop thinking about them at all. She decides she needs to get some fresh air and hops on the streetcar, but she doesn't get off at the shopping center. She stays on board just to take in the view of the desert, which the driver finds pretty strange, but he keeps on driving anyway. All of a sudden, an airplane appears up in the sky, looking exactly like Margaret's toy, and it's going down, crashing right in the middle of the desert. Alice gets really worried and wants to know if they might need some help or something, but the driver absolutely refuses to take her there because it goes against the project's rules. Alice breaks the rules anyway and walks deep into the desert until she eventually comes across a large hill with a spiral road going all the way around it. She climbs all the way up until she finds a mysterious dome-like structure and starts calling out for help. but absolutely nobody answers her. Alice slowly gets closer to the dome and finally places her hands on its glass wall. This single movement causes her whole body to shake, and she throws her head back as a whole series of strange and disturbing images flashes right before her eyes. When Alice can finally blink again, she finds herself lying back in her own bed, now feeling really confused and scared. Alice goes out to the kitchen, where Jack is busy trying to make some dinner because he didn't want to wake her up. It turns out Alice had already made it back home by the time Jack got home from work, but she just can't remember how. She brings up the plane crash, and Jack replies that there wasn't any crash at all. Otherwise, everyone in town would surely be talking all about it. Alice gets pretty upset and just chalks it all up to some bad nightmares, and Jack distracts her with a few comforting touches and some jokes about his cooking. The next day, Alice is busy cleaning the windows. The women in this world are always working to have some kind of occupation, eh? When suddenly the wall behind her starts to move in on its own, pressing her hard against the glass. Alice is completely terrified, and then, in just the blink of an eye, the wall is right back in its place. It was just another powerful hallucination. At that exact moment, the phone rings, and when she answers, she hears Margaret asking if she saw the same thing she did, saying that she wasn't actually going crazy. Alice reassures her friend that she isn't crazy, and then hangs up the phone. That conversation just won't leave Alice's mind. During her next ballet class, she's completely shocked to see her own reflection transforming into Margaret, who is copying Alice's every move. But then, her reflection suddenly starts smashing its head against the glass. Alice screams out in a panic during the class, and everyone gets a real fright. When Alice turns back around, Margaret has vanished. Worried sick, she runs all the way back home, only to find Margaret standing on the roof of her house. Alice yells at her to stop what she's doing, but Margaret ignores her and just throws herself off with a knife in her hand, falling from the rooftop. Alice panics all over again and tries to run to Margaret, but then men dressed in red suits appear out of nowhere to drag her away. That night, Alice tries to tell Jack what exactly happened, but he simply doesn't believe her. He tells her that Margaret's husband is with her at the hospital and that it was all just a simple accident that happened while she was cleaning the windows. Alice knows this is a total lie, and she demands to know the real truth about the Victory Project, asking Jack pointedly about his work and why they are hiding something big. He yells back at her, reminding her that answers to those questions could mean losing the wonderful life they have built together, and he begs her to just forget the whole thing. Alice is really disturbed and goes back to watch some TV, but this just triggers another hallucination, this time of herself drowning in a swimming pool in a way that looks very similar to when she was trapped by the wall. When she blinks, she's standing right up against the window, as if she were desperately trying to get out. The following morning, Alice is wrapping up the dinner leftovers when she completely loses control of her own hands. They start moving by themselves and wrap her entire head in plastic wrap. Alice snaps out of it, rips off the plastic, takes a deep breath, and starts to realize that she might actually be going crazy. Jack brings Dr. Collins over to do a quick checkup, and the doctor decides that it must be stress brought on by the shock of recent events. When Alice tries to explain what really went down, Collins says that the mind can sometimes alter reality when it's overwhelmed by some kind of grief. He also tries to prescribe her some medication, but both Jack and Alice refuse it, promising that she doesn't need it just yet. At this moment, Alice notices that Collins has Margaret's files right there in his briefcase. She asks him what happened to Margaret. Collins explains she was suffering from a number of paranoid episodes, which was preventing her husband from doing his job in peace, so he was unfortunately fired from the Victory Project, and Margaret and her husband went back to New York to get proper treatment for her. Afterwards, Collins leaves the house, but forgets his briefcase behind. Alice immediately jumps for the briefcase to look for some clues, but Collins comes right back when he realizes he forgot it. Alice pretends to just be handing the briefcase back to him, and as soon as he leaves, it's clear she managed to steal Margaret's files. However, every single page has been redacted. The files are totally useless, so Alice decides to just burn them. She starts drinking, and while she's taking a shower, her mind flashes with more disturbing images again, and then she suddenly wakes up when Jack gets home and puts on some music. Alice is still pretty confused, you know, and Jack asks her a question that seems to come out of absolutely nowhere. He says they should have a baby because maybe that will help occupy Alice's mind. She tells him she'll think about it. Later that night, the two of them are at a fancy party being hosted by Frank, but he just will not stop staring at Alice the whole time he's discussing things with the doctor. This whole situation makes her feel quite uncomfortable, eh? And she starts to kind of break down when a dancer appears in the room, which reminds Alice of some of her earlier visions. As the dancer begins her routine, Alice starts having even more disturbing visions, gets right to the very edge of insanity, and just starts to cry. So Alice then begs Jack to please take her home because she's really not feeling well at all. But just then, Frank is getting up on stage to make a really big announcement. And to everyone's complete surprise, Frank calls Jack up to join him and announces that he is being promoted to a very important position within the Victory Project. Everyone immediately starts to dance, and Alice runs off to the washroom, where she experiences even more of those visions. Bunny, her friend, suddenly shows up to check on what's happening with her. Alice explains the whole thing, but Bunny cuts her off and scolds her for breaking the established rules. She thinks Alice is behaving just like a little kid and is trying to totally ruin her husband's big night. So she really needs to pull herself together and just be a good wife. Alice feels she has no other choice but to go back to her old routine and try to forget everything. A few days later, Jack puts together a dinner party at their house, and Frank brings his wife along as well. While Alice is busy in the kitchen cooking, Frank comes over specifically to provoke her a little bit, telling her that he finds her absolutely fascinating because he's always wanted someone to truly challenge him. He says that's because great men can only change history if they are properly pushed, so he really hopes Alice will continue to keep pushing him in the future. This really intrigues Alice, who then decides to sit herself right at the head of the table instead of her husband, mostly because she wants to look directly at Frank while they all eat. When they start talking, Alice interrupts to ask the guests all about their lives before they came to the city. And basically, their life stories were all exactly the same, right down to how they met and everything else, almost as if someone had gone and implanted false memories directly into the family's heads. She points out that they are all doing this and have been instructed to remember these specific stories because the people in charge want them to forget their actual, real lives, just like they did with Margaret. Her husband Jack tries to make Alice stop talking, but Frank tells her to please continue. So Alice just lets it all out and says that Frank is lying to absolutely everyone and that he wants to create a so-called perfect world, but one that is filled with slaves, since none of the women are ever allowed to leave this life. Frank just keeps this fake little smirk on his face, looking like he was manipulating the girl all along, and tells everyone that Alice is suffering from the exact same psychosis as Margaret, even accusing her of having been in his bedroom. Everyone is now feeling extremely uncomfortable, and Shelley completely loses her patience, calling Alice a child for making a huge scene and for insulting her husband. She just gets up and leaves, and all of the other guests follow right after her. As Jack is opening the door for them, Frank stays behind just to tell Alice that he had truly expected more from her before he leaves as well. Alice is absolutely furious, and when her husband comes back in, she says she never wanted to spoil his big night, that she loved him so much, and that it didn't matter where they were, she just wanted to be with him. But she begs with every fiber of her being for them to please leave that place. Jack finally gives in and agrees that they will run away together. Alice doesn't waste a single second and runs to pack her bags in the car, but as she gets in, Jack just says he's sorry. Alice doesn't understand what is happening, and then men in red suits appear to drag her away. Jack starts to cry as he hears his wife's screams for help. Alice is taken away to a hospital to receive therapy, which is actually electroshock treatment. While her entire body is in pain, she begins to have those visions of her and Jack again. They reveal a different life where she and Jack are living in the present day, and he's singing that same song he always sings. In this life, Jack has lost his job, but Alice is able to pick up an extra shift at the hospital where she works as a doctor. Except working double shifts starts to really take a toll on Alice's life. When she gets home, Jack is no help at all. He hasn't made dinner, he didn't pay the water bill, and the dishes are still sitting there dirty. He even has the audacity to ask Alice to satisfy him, even though she is clearly and extremely tired from working. The truth is, Jack is a lazy guy who makes absolutely no effort to make his wife happy or even to do the most basic chores around the house. He just spends his days and nights on the computer listening to Frank's podcast, which promotes a way for men to find their supposed true selves, far away from the society that suffocates them. Back in the present, Alice wakes up again in the Victory Project hospital, and Collins announces that she has been all fixed up. So Alice is sent right back to the city, where she begins to live out her old millionaire routine as if nothing had ever happened. The days go by peacefully until one night Jack comes home from work singing that same song once again. It's in that precise moment that everything is revealed in Alice's visions, that other life, it's actually real. He had signed up to be a part of the Victory Project, where he was able to choose to have the perfect life of a millionaire living in the 1960s. This granted him special access to a machine that he keeps in their real home, and her real body is connected to it 24 hours a day, because her entire life in Victory is just a simulation. This is the exact same situation for all the wives who are there. Like the other men, Jack connects to the simulation every day for only a few hours and disconnects when he goes into the headquarters building in the desert. The rest of the time, he is personally responsible for keeping Alice's real body healthy, and he has to work some kind of shitty job just to pay for that machine. Back inside Victory, Alice collapses onto the floor in pain, completely overwhelmed by the flood of images that just hit her mind. She's totally conflicted and demands to know the whole truth. So Jack immediately yells at her, saying they did all of this just so they could have a perfect life, because their lives were so miserable back in the real world. Alice still thinks he's a complete idiot for taking away her real life and then trying to convince her that she was the one going crazy. She's also very worried about the other wives and especially the children, but Jack immediately clarifies that the children aren't actually real. They are just a part of the simulation's programming. Fed up with all of her husband's lies, Alice grabs a glass and uses it to hit Jack over the head, knocking him out cold. What she doesn't realize is that dying in Victory also means you die in real life. And as the real Jack closes his eyes for the last time, he passes away. Frank gets a phone call letting him know what just happened. At that exact moment, Bunny comes into the house, immediately covers Jack's body, and explains everything. She confesses that she knew all along and that she actively chose the simulation because it's the only way she can have her children back, since they died in the real world. She also explains that Alice needs to get to the headquarters and disconnect herself because Jack can't do it for her now that he's actually dead in real life. Alice is scared, but her friend urges her to run. As she leaves, she sees all the neighbors also coming out of their houses. As all the streetlights start to explode, the women begin to realize something is seriously wrong because the simulation is now glitching and failing. But the men are all focused on asking about Jack, and they try to stop Alice from leaving. Bunny gives Alice a chance to get into Jack's car and just drive, and then the men in red arrive, stealing other cars to chase after her. It turns out that the men in red are actually part of the simulation's own system, designed to protect the program, and a high-speed chase begins through the streets. While Alice manages to get out of the city without any real problems, things get a lot more complicated out in the desert when the men in red start ramming her car. Dr. Collins is also coming in his own car, and he speeds up to help them. But when Alice realizes she's about to be surrounded, she slams on the brakes, causing all the other cars to crash into each other. At that moment, Frank, who is the one managing the server, gets the news about Collins's death. His wife, Shelley, overhears the phone call. So, Shelley comes up from behind him and stabs him, saying that it's her turn to control the system now because he was such a fool for messing with and provoking that girl. Out in the desert, Alice keeps on driving until she finds the hill and gets on the road. But unfortunately, the car gets stuck on a tight curve. However, Alice refuses to give up. She jumps out of the car and starts running, thinking that the car has blocked the path. But it's not enough. The men in red start climbing the hill on foot, trying desperately to catch her. So, Alice has no choice but to race to the very top. When she finally reaches the dome, she also remembers her entire real life together with her husband. At that exact moment, the men in red appear right behind her. Alice runs straight to the wall, places her hands on the glass, and throws her head back, fully disconnecting from Victory and reconnecting to the real Alice. Suddenly, everything just goes black. Alice takes a deep breath and returns to the real world. And that's how it ends. Don't Worry, Darling, a science fiction drama film from 2022. And I hope to see you in the next video.